Today is the time to continue with the Old Games That Still Look Good series. This is the third video now, and the other two came out at the end of last year, so it's been a little while. The criteria for old is actually quite relaxed, as always with these videos, just 10 years. The reason for that is just because it's a good opportunity to talk about games from all sorts of eras, though you'll probably notice that these games are all restricted to the 2000s today. But that's kind of the point. I just want to talk about some fun games. Nothing's ranked. It's all just my opinion. Let's get started. The original Far Cry is one of those games that really impressed me with its graphics upon release in 2004 rather. When it comes to first-person shooters of the period, Far Cry really stood out. Most of the popular shooters at the time were World War II based, which normally didn't have very vibrant color palettes, as you can probably imagine. Not only was it bright and saturated with color, but the foliage and water stood out really well too. This level of detail in games definitely wasn't the norm. I was a really big fan of Battlefield 1942, but that game just looks so bland and empty compared to Far Cry. This is the first time I've played Far Cry in a number of years, and I forgot just how difficult this game actually is. I remember always trying to play as stealthily as possible. Now I know why. Once you get spotted, everybody just shoots you. You do get spotted pretty easily no matter how slow you go and how far out of sight you try to be. Somehow an enemy will almost always manage to magically spot you. Something I only realized recently is how similar Oblivion and Far Cry look. They're divided by 2 years, Oblivion being 2 years younger. The grass and plants, as well as the way the water looks, it's just vaguely similar. Need for Speed Underground 2. There's no reason not to include the first Underground game, but Underground 2 is the one I have on hand, so the focus is mainly on that, though most things I talk about apply to both games. Having been a big fan of NFS Porsche, I was actually thinking they lost the plot when the first Underground came out, but both 1 and 2 ended up being games I really enjoyed. The nighttime and wet roads look is now iconic. So much so that it's been resurrected for the 2015 version of NFS. The Underground games don't look very realistic technically, but I think it does capture that urban nighttime look and feel quite well. It still manages to look immersive, lighting effects are interesting and flashy, and the road reflection is something that's pretty nice considering the era. The sense of speed is something the game tries to enhance, also with its blurry vision thing. These games very much go with the Fast and the Furious and Too Fast, Too Furious aesthetic of the early 2000s. Hence all the modifications for the cars are appropriate to the era with neon lights and subs in the trunk. You know, stuff you can only see in Japan these days. And while this isn't a graphical thing, the engine sounds were pretty good for the time. All the VQ-powered cars like the 350Z and that Infiniti sounded quite recognizable. Even today, a lot of times when I hear that engine, I think of Underground 2 because the amount of time I spent driving the 350 in it. Underground 1 and 2 had a real impact on car culture. Back when I was in high school, this was our way of customizing cars before we had cars. We talk about the wheels we put on our cars, the stickers, how much power they made, our high scores in drifting. Once one of my friends even brought in a tiny portable CRT TV, his PS2, and Underground, so we could play the game during lunch. Good times. Portal is a very well-known game, and I've seen a number of people mention it in the comments of the previous videos. In my opinion, the appeal here in terms of the way the game looks is minimalism. It's really easy to make minimalistic games look bland, but there's just enough shading and detail to give you a very clean and clinical look. One of the reasons I think it looks good is because everything that could potentially look ugly isn't there. There's no people, except for the occasional glimpse you get of yourself through a portal, and because there isn't so much stuff in the levels, small, well-made details shine through. Like these windows. It makes you think and wonder about what the facility actually looks like outside of the area which you play in. Not to mention, why are there no people sitting in those chairs? Of course, one of the things that's great about Portal is spotting all the gradually increasing problems with the facility, the absence of people being one of the first clues. And then eventually, you know, the walls are falling apart and stuff like that. So not only does the game look good, but the art direction is very well thought out. Luigi's Mansion. This is one of those games I actually don't have much experience with, but I've always liked the concept of it. Plus, Luigi is the definitive player too, so it's cool to see him star in a game which eventually would be his own spin-off series. I think the family-friendly haunted house look is actually very fun. The cartoony furniture has a charm to it also. The look reminds me of that old Mickey Mouse cartoon from the 20s called The Haunted House. I always enjoyed that one. Technically speaking, there are some problems with the graphics, like the door opening cutscenes being, well, pre-rendered cutscenes. You can see the lighting doesn't match up at all. The textures aren't the most high-res ever, and a lot of the 3D models look a bit pointy here and there. But I think the general look of Luigi's Mansion is quite good. The colors and lighting work well, and I like how they managed to make relatively small spaces interesting. You go through the rooms one by one, and it's nice how they managed to design each one to be interesting to explore, yet remain visually homogeneous with each other. Here's a game I like to bring up every once in a while. It's Star Fox Adventures for the GameCube. Graphically speaking, there are a number of accomplishments, especially if you consider that this is a 2002 game, and when you start comparing it to Zelda games of that system. Star Fox Adventures has both stylized and realistic elements. There's a varied color palette, anything from bright and vivid to cold and desaturated. And believe it or not, the game runs at 60 frames per second. It feels so nice to control. The GameCube Zelda games may both look good and run well, but it can't match the 60 FPS goodness. It's quite the accomplishment. Rare did a really good job making sure that the game not only looked good, but performed well. There's even grass. Normally you just find a grass texture with the odd foliage poking out. Whatever that grass technology was obviously also used for the fur of the characters. It looks kind of similar, which is a bit funny. I think this game is definitely one of the GameCube's best looking games. Obviously the early 2000s must have been on my mind, since all the games featured in this video except for Portal are from that era. There are some themes I've noticed. Many games of the time played around with certain details like shading, water, foliage, and reflections. And there's some other stuff too, like bump mapping. And it's those details that took 3D graphics to another level. So those are some older games that still look good in my opinion. Like I said, it's just a for fun sort of list. Making these list type videos often gives me ideas for other videos, which is one reason I like making them. But they also seem to cause a lot of response from you. There's a lot of stories connected to video games, and it's interesting reading about them in the comments. So if you've got some interesting stories about some good-looking video games, whether they're part of this video or not, then, write them in the comments. So that's going to be it for this video. I still have a list of other games we can talk about in future videos. Thank you to all the Patreon supporters. You can get your name on the end card as well by becoming a patron. I also have a second channel, by the way, which is a mixture of anime niche game news, and as of recently, some Let's Play style videos too. Basically, the second channel is mainly unscripted and more anime game themed. So if you like the sound of that, click the link in the description or on the top right card thing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.